Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings started when I was a kid in 1973 in Washington Parish, Louisiana. I would spend summers at my cousin's house in the country. I grew up in the greater New Orleans area. And living out in the country back in the 70s, they didn't have air conditioning. All they had was an attic fan. So in the summer times, they would have all their windows open, and that attic fan would draw the curtains into the house. The bed I was sleeping in was up against the window, and woke up in the middle of the night to this horrible, it's like a growling, snarling. It's really hard to describe. It was a terrifying sound. I looked up and I could just see the silhouette of a Bigfoot standing just outside the window. The only thing between us was the window screen. Not even the curtains were between us. And that one scared me the most. And I pretty much just slid out of my bed and crawled into the hall. And that's where I spent the night. It got a little scary during the night when I had to use the bathroom because those windows was open too. And I was deathly afraid that it was going to come back and snatch me out the window. But thankfully, that didn't happen. I grew up, like I said, in the greater New Orleans area. I didn't move up here until the mid-1990s. I was the first person to live on this property in probably 50 or 60 years. It had been family property in the past, and then I moved up here in 96. And my son was about 8 years old, and he would complain from time to time that he heard something slapping the outside of the house, but always where his head was, closest to him, was where the slaps would be. It wouldn't be just random on the walls. It was always right wherever he was. That's where it was getting slapped. And then I had a similar encounter years later. He was in high school, and he was away at school, and I was putting a window unit in my bedroom, and I had to go out to my shed in the backyard to get a piece of wood to put the air conditioner in the window properly. So I went out the back door, and I had to walk through the yard a little bit to get to the shed, and I went out there, and I guess I was digging around for about 45 minutes before I found the board and got it cut. And when I started to come back to the house, I noticed the back porch light wasn't on, and I was pretty sure I turned it on, but not 100% sure because I had a flashlight with me. So I stepped up the steps and onto the porch, and when I did, I noticed my back door was open, and I was terrified that somebody had gone into the house while I was in the shed. But I looked in the door, and my cat was sitting right there by the door, and she is afraid of people, so if somebody was in the trailer, the cat would have been hiding. So I stepped inside, and I turned on the first light switch I could, which happened to be the light on the back porch, and I slammed the door closed. And as soon as I slammed the door closed, something punched that door. My hand was still on the doorknob, so I felt it. It was up high. It was even with my head. I'm 5'2", and then that porch is probably another 4.5 feet off the ground, and then it's 4 feet wide, so it would have had to reach up and over that porch to punch the door. I looked out the back window. It's frosted because it's a trailer, so I couldn't see any detail, but there was nobody standing on the porch. So whatever it was, it had to follow me through the yard and be right behind me when I closed that door, and it punched it. And it was definitely a punch. It wasn't a stick or a rock, because I could just tell the difference between a fist. It's firm, but it gives, and it just makes a different sound than something hard and solid. And that was the first time I think I was frightened by whatever was going on here. There was one night I was sitting outside watching a meteor shower. It was a nice night. It was nice and cool, and I had my little chihuahua out with me. We were sitting in the front yard, and I could hear something moving behind the house. It wasn't a loud sound, so at first I thought, well, maybe it's a raccoon or a possum or something. So I didn't pay much attention to it, and I'm watching the stars. It was a real pretty meteor shower. I was seeing probably a shooting star every couple of minutes. So I kind of got absorbed with that, but my little dog started barking back toward the yard where I was hearing something moving around. And that's when I noticed this odor. It was kind of like a wet dog, but more like something dead too. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's a fox or something. But I noticed that it was moving in closer to where I was, and I don't have any outside lights on. Well, I didn't want any because it would have messed up my view of the sky too. But the closer it got, the stronger that smell got. And eventually my little dog, he's a Chihuahua, he thinks he's a pit bull. But that night he didn't take off after it. He stayed by me and continued to bark. But after that smell got stronger and stronger, and I could hear whatever that was moving in closer, and I could tell it was bigger than what I thought originally, I just got this overwhelming feeling that I needed to go inside. I didn't need to stay out any longer than that because I wasn't sure what that was back there. And then I guess it was jumping ahead to like 2009. Something woke me up. I was laying in bed. It was about 1:00 in the morning. And I thought I felt the house shake. And I didn't hear anything at first. But, I have 2 dogs in the house. I thought, well, maybe the dog bumped the bed. Maybe it wasn't the whole house shaking. And then I laid there and turned the TV on because I couldn't go back to sleep. And I hear something walking on my roof. Now, I had had my roof replaced about 2 years prior to that. And the guy that replaced it, he probably weighed about 200 pounds. He was a big man. So I was familiar with what something large on my roof sounded like. And this thing was every bit 200 pounds, if not a little more. Not a whole lot, but it sounded a little heavier than that guy, the roofer, had been. And it was crawling along the roof toward where my bedroom was. And, I live alone, and it was so scary listening to this thing crawl on my roof when I live in an extremely rural area. The only land around me is either timberland or cattle pastures. I don't have any neighbors. It's all cattle pastures all around me. Right as whatever it was got above me, I muted the TV, and when I muted the TV, it stopped instantly. And I never did hear it leave. I don't know where it went, how it went, but I didn't get any more sleep that night. I stayed awake the rest of the night because I didn't know where that thing was, and I wasn't about to go back to sleep. In 2018, my driveway washed out. I have a low spot coming back to my house, that's built up, and I have culverts in it. I got damage to it after Hurricane Katrina, and then we had a couple other heavy rains, and so it washed out. And I couldn't afford to get it fixed right away, so I would have to park my truck on one side of the holler, and then where it was built up, I would have to walk across it. I had an old boat I put across it, and that's what I was using for a bridge, because it was about 8 feet wide where it had washed out. And I had to walk up my driveway from there. And it was early spring, so it was still getting dark early. And I was just coming home from work. It was still daylight enough for me to see across the yard, but I couldn't see into the wood line. And as I was walking up the driveway, I heard, at first I thought it was a bull or a horse. I had a horse at one time, so I know what it sounds like when they're running. You have the hollow thuds on the ground that you can almost feel. And I heard this running toward me through the woods, and limbs was breaking. And I heard it was this gravelly growl noise. And when it did that, I knew it wasn't a bull. Plus, there's no bulls in those woods or horses. And so when it did that, I stopped. And by then I had the suspicion that I had Bigfoot here, just putting it all together. And from the time I was a kid, I was interested in the subject, so I would read whatever I could find on it, and I'd started listening to podcasts. As a matter of fact, I didn't realize that Bigfoot at the windows with little kids was a thing until probably 2017, when I started listening to podcasts and realized, hey, that's a thing. But anyway, so I stopped when I heard this thing growl, and I started talking to it. I said, look, I don't mean any harm. I'm going up the driveway. I'm going to go in the house. I'm going to leave you alone. Just let me get to the house, because I really thought it was going to kill me. It really scared me a lot. I never did see it, though. It stopped just short of coming out of the wood line. So I never did actually see it. But it did let me get in the house that night, and it was quiet the rest of the night. But the next night was the first night that it was warm enough to put my window AC on. So I was running it for the first time, and about 10:30, 11:45, something started slapping my air conditioner. That air conditioner is about 6 feet off of the ground, and then it's about 2 feet high, and whatever was slapping the top of it. And by then I was convinced that I had Bigfoot and they were aggravating me. Like I said, I live alone, and a single woman, they always seem to aggravate single women. But for about 45 minutes, it slapped that air conditioner. Not regular, but every 5 or 10 minutes it'd slap it. And my dogs were in there with me. Usually I have one dog, wherever I am, that's where he's going to be. But he decided that night he didn't want to be in there. So they bailed on me and left me laying in there by myself. One thing that frightened me about that was I was worried he's going to figure out that all he had to do is push that window unit in and the window would be open. But thankfully, that didn't happen. There was another night that I got up, middle of the night. I had some ice cream in the freezer, and it was calling my name. So I got up to go in there and get me some ice cream. And I didn't turn on any lights, but I did have like a hall light on, so it illuminated the kitchen a little bit. And I have a kitchen window right there where I was standing, and it's about 8 feet off the ground, and the window's probably maybe 24, 36 inches high. And there was red eyes looking in at me that night. Those eyes was every bit of 10 feet up looking in. Like I said, by then I was sure I had them. So it really frightened me that it was comfortable enough not only to come up to the trailer, but to stand right at my window and look at me while I was standing 2 feet on the inside of the window. But thankfully, he didn't do anything except peek in my window that night. I have a friend that he lives in Texas, but he's looking for property over here in Louisiana. And so I'll let him park his camper on my land, and we'll sit out around a fire, sit and talk into the night. And about 4 months ago, we were sitting there. And again, it was just getting dark, but I could still see into the woods the way the sun was shining through the trees. And I saw the shape of a Bigfoot. It looked kind of gray, but it was hard to tell because he was in the shadows. I didn't see any detail, but he moved so fast and so quietly through those woods. I didn't say anything to my friend for about 15 minutes. I waited until he was good and gone, and then I said something, and by then the sun had set enough to where it had shifted and I could see into those woods better. And so I got up to go look. I was thinking it was maybe 8 feet tall, but once I got in there and got into the trees, this thing had to have been 10 feet tall. And I didn't think they got that big down here. But I did see a gray one once before. I had been over to my friend's house. She lives over near the Pearl River, and she lives at the north end of protected land, which feeds into the Honey Island Swamp. And she was having problems with the Sasquatch coming into her yard, growling at him. He had become real aggressive, and they had actually fired shots at him, and I think that kind of had something to do with it. But anyway, we went over there to visit her and sat around and wound up sitting up all night. But I had to come home to let my dogs out, so we were on our way home, and about 5 miles from my home, as we were driving down this country road, I looked off. There was a gravel road that went off of the road we were on, and there was a Bigfoot crossing that road. Now, he was like a smoky gray, and he was thin. He wasn't real bulky, but he wasn't real thin. He's muscular. We went and looked where he crossed that road, and we didn't see any footprints, but we did see where he had turned over the leaf litter when he was running. And we figured he was probably about 9 feet tall. So they have them in this area, and they're kind of brave. I think that they're getting used to coming into the farms. You know, farmers put out syrup tubs, and they have the liquid feed licks, and it's easier for them to go get into a feed bin than it is to chase a deer down. So I really kind of feel like that's why they're coming in to where I live. Like I said, it's rural, but I don't think they're hunting as much anymore. I think they're coming in and getting feed. And I think that's about it.
My Bigfoot sighting occurred in 1986 in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. It started off with Thanksgiving vacation. My best friend, who lived across the street from me in Long Island, New York, his father had a property with a mobile home on it with 9 acres of field and some woods. And every vacation, summer vacation, holiday vacations, whenever we were off from school, we would go up to the property and we'd shoot our BB guns. We'd go fishing, hiking in the woods with his father, and all the things 2 9-year-old boys would do. Well, we were on the property. We were there for a day, the first day. And that night, the first night we were there, my friend told his father that he thought he saw a dead bear in the woods. And his father said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Well, maybe tomorrow we'll go check it out." So the next day came. We got ready in the morning, got our BB guns ready, put our boots on and everything. And me and my friend, we went out alone. We went across the mobile home was set off the road about 20 yards, and then from the mobile home to the tree line was probably about 100 yards, I'd say. So we walked out across the field. We got into the woods. First, we started shaking dead trees, the dead tree falls, and we were shaking them back and forth so all the branches were falling off. We were doing that for about 15, 20 minutes, having fun, shooting our BB guns. And then my friend mentioned about the dead bear he thought he saw. So I said, where was it? And he said it was south on the tree line about 60 yards away. So we started walking our way over there, and he pointed it out to me. And from the tree line, I saw a reddish-brown animal, I thought it was, laying down. So he got on his father was a retired police officer in New York City. So his father always gave us this big old police radio that we would use to keep in touch with him just in case anything was to happen to us. We got hurt or we got lost. A big old radio. It had to weigh 12 pounds. It was probably 18 inches long. So as my friend starts pulling the antenna up to call his father, I started to walk towards the dead bear, I thought it was, or whatever animal it was. So as I started to approach it, I got about 40 feet from it, and this thing moved. So I stopped in my tracks, and it stood up. It rolled over and stood up with its back towards me. And as it stood up, just as it stood up to turn around, I turned around and started running. I started running away from it. Now, this thing it had to have been 7.5, 8 feet tall. It had reddish brown hair. And I was only, 8, 9 years old. In my mind, I wasn't thinking it was a Bigfoot. I don't even think I knew what a Bigfoot was then. But I thought it was another hunter. And my friend's father always told us that there should never, ever be anyone hunting on the property. It's private property. Now, my father was a police officer, and my friend's father was a police officer. We were both very aware kids. We were very street smart, very aware. So I got scared. I thought, maybe I did something wrong. This guy was going to yell at me, scream at me. So as I turned around to run, this animal, this Bigfoot, I guess, screamed at me. And it roared. It was a high-pitched roar. It was just something like nothing I've ever heard before. I could feel it penetrating my body, the power of it, the force of it. Like I always tell people when I tell the story, it reminded me of standing on a train platform when the train goes by. It was just an unbelievable sound. It was like a self-defense mechanism. It kind of pushed me out of the forest. It was like it just pushed me out. So as I started running away, I see my friend standing on the tree line, and he's yelling into the radio for his father. He's yelling, "Dad, Dad, Dad." I ran right past him. I stopped and waited, and he came running out of the field. He came running out of the woods, excuse me. So as he came running out, we stopped, and we said to him, "So what was that?" He said, "I don't know." Now, he never saw it. He didn't see it, but he heard it. And this thing was still screaming and howling from inside the woods. And it was incredible. And it was just the sound, I can't describe it. It was like it pushed me out of the woods. It was like it shut down my whole body, and my body just said, "You need to leave right now and go," without me even knowing it. It was like a weapon. So we both ran to the house. We went inside the mobile home, told his father that we were trying to call him on the radio, told his father what happened. His father just looked at us very concerned and said, "I don't want you guys in the woods on this trip anymore." So that was pretty much it for that night. We left the next day. I went home, told my friends and my family, and that was pretty much it. It was weird. It wasn't a big deal. Like you would think a 9-year-old kid sees something like this, he'd be telling the whole world, but I don't recall me saying anything to a lot of people about it. So I just couldn't understand it at that time, and I didn't even know what a Bigfoot was, probably until I saw that movie, Harry and the Hendersons. And then about 15 years ago, when I started researching, on YouTube, getting into the YouTube thing, and then researching Bigfoots, that's when it was really a shocker to me, like, wow, that's what I saw in the woods that day. And then talking about the infrasound with how they yell and they scream, it was just an incredible volume on this beast. There's no way a man could produce that sound. And that's about it. And I think about it every single day. Every single day I think about it. At night when I'm laying in bed, and it was about, like I said, it was about 7 to 8 foot tall. It had reddish brown hair. I didn't see a look at the face. I didn't get a look at the face because as it turned around, I turned around, thinking as a little kid I was going to get in trouble or this big man was going to yell at me or something of that nature. But it did scream at me, this thing, and it was something else, I'll tell you. And that's about the whole encounter right there.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.